Joe was sitting at his desk, staring at his computer screen when his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He hesitated for a second, thinking it was probably just another spam call. He'd been getting a lot of those lately. His podcast had grown bigger, and that seemed to attract all sorts of strange calls. But this one was persistent, buzzing again, then again. Joe finally picked up the phone, annoyed but curious. The voice on the other end was calm and clear. "Hello, is this Joe Rogan?" it asked. "Yeah, this is Joe," he replied, leaning back in his chair. He was already wondering who would be calling him at this hour. The voice introduced itself as someone working for Donald Trump. Joe felt his eyebrows raise. "I'm sorry, who?" he asked, half thinking it was a prank. "We'd like to arrange a private meeting. No cameras. No press. Just a conversation. Donald Trump would like to speak with you." Joe blinked a few times. He had heard rumors about Trump's unfiltered opinions and his love for making waves. But this felt different. No press, no cameras, just a conversation. It didn't sound like something that would happen in today's world, where everything was about the spotlight. He was used to doing interviews with actors, scientists, and comedians, but a former president, this was new territory. The caller quickly added that they understood Joe might need some time to think about it, but that they were looking for a quick decision. Joe was still skeptical. "What's this about?" he asked. "It's a private matter. No media coverage, just a direct discussion. He values your perspective," the voice explained. "He's waiting to hear your thoughts on some things. He believes you have unique insights." Joe's first instinct was to hang up. It felt like a bad joke. But the calmness in the voice made him second-guess himself. He could hear the seriousness in their words, and that made him hesitate. He had never been the type to shy away from tough situations or new experiences. He thought about it for a moment, weighing the decision. "Okay, fine," Joe finally said. "When and where?" "Tomorrow, at 3 p.m. We'll send you the details." The call ended as quickly as it started. Joe sat there for a few seconds, staring at his phone. What had just happened? He didn't know what to expect, but he had a feeling this meeting would be unlike any interview he had ever done. He shook his head, standing up from his desk. This was big. He didn't know what Trump wanted, but he was about to find out. The next day, Joe found himself in a car, driving down an empty highway under a hot afternoon sun. The quiet hum of the engine was the only sound as he gazed out of the window. He couldn't help but wonder about the meeting. What was going to happen? Who would be there? And why him? It all felt a bit surreal. It wasn't every day that someone like Donald Trump, a former president, wanted to meet in private. Joe had been given very little information. A man at the other end of the phone had told him only the basics: a time, location, and a promise of privacy. The car turned off the main road and onto a smaller, quieter street lined with large, gated properties. Joe felt the tension building. This was no ordinary meeting. It felt like something more. After a few turns, the car slowed to a stop in front of a large estate. The house was impressive, but not in the way of flashy mansions he'd seen before. It had an air of quiet wealth: tall stone walls, a wide driveway, and tall trees that seemed to shield the place from the outside world. The security was tight, too. There were two men standing near the entrance, dressed in dark suits, looking like they belonged to a Secret Service detail. The driver motioned for Joe to get out, and he stepped into the warm afternoon air. The men at the gate didn't smile, but nodded as if they had been expecting him. They didn't ask for identification, but one of them checked his phone before giving a brief nod, signaling him to go ahead. As Joe walked up the driveway, the silence felt heavy. The house looked calm from the outside, but it was obvious that something big was happening behind those walls. His mind raced with questions, but he couldn't let them distract him. He was there for a reason. A door opened, and a man in a black suit stood waiting. He didn't introduce himself, just silently gestured for Joe to follow him inside. The house was massive, with tall ceilings and long corridors. There were no pictures on the walls, just clean white spaces that gave it a cold, sterile feeling. It didn't feel like someone's home. It felt like a place designed for meetings, serious meetings. Joe followed the man down a hallway that led to a large, well-lit room. There, standing by a window, was Donald Trump. He was alone. No staff, no cameras, just him, casually standing in front of the view outside. When he turned around to face Joe, there was a certain calmness in his demeanor. He wasn't the loud, attention-grabbing figure Joe had seen on TV. This was different. "Joe," Trump said, his voice steady and surprisingly relaxed. "I'm glad you could make it." Joe didn't know how to respond at first. He had expected the usual bombastic energy, But instead, he was facing someone who seemed quieter, more thoughtful. "Thanks for having me," Joe finally said, feeling a little out of place. But he kept his cool. After all, this was his world, talking to people, listening to their stories, and getting to the heart of things. Whatever this meeting was about, he was ready to hear it. Joe stood there, trying to take in the room. The silence between him and Trump felt oddly comfortable. He had expected Trump to launch into a big speech, or at least break the ice with some exaggerated humor. But instead, the atmosphere was calm. Joe wasn't sure how to start. He didn't want to jump into heavy topics too soon. Trump, sensing the hesitation, was the first to speak. "You probably wonder why I wanted to meet, right?" he said, leaning slightly against the window frame. His tone was more casual than Joe expected. Joe nodded, trying to stay relaxed. "Yeah, honestly, this is a bit unexpected." Trump gave a small, knowing smile. "I'd like to keep things interesting. You're used to the wild, long conversations on your podcast, right? Figured you'd be up for something different." Joe chuckled, feeling the tension ease just a bit. "Yeah, I'm definitely used to long talks, but this is a different kind of conversation. No cameras, no audience, just two people." "Exactly," Trump said. "I've always believed people act differently when there's no audience. It's just more honest. We get straight to the point." Joe agreed. He had always said that the best conversations happened when people weren't performing for the camera. They were real, raw, and sometimes unpredictable. But this felt even more personal. This wasn't just a conversation. It felt like an opportunity to hear something important, something Joe couldn't ignore. After a moment, Trump continued, "I've been thinking about things for a while now. How the political system has become a mess. How people are tired of the same old nonsense. That's where you come in, Joe. You've built this platform, your podcast. People listen because you're honest. You don't sugarcoat things. You're willing to question everything. That's what we need more of." Joe listened, intrigued. It wasn't what he expected. He had thought Trump might just want to chat about politics or even give him some lecture on his version of the world. But this felt different, more like a genuine conversation about what was wrong with the way things worked. "So, you think the system's broken?" Joe asked, leaning in slightly. He was always curious about people's take on politics, especially those who had been at the center of it all. "And you want to change it?" "I don't know if change is the right word," Trump replied, his voice thoughtful. "It's more about adjusting, making people understand that there's another way to think about things. Right now, people are stuck in a two-party system that's only good at dividing them. I'm trying to figure out if there's another path." Joe thought about that for a moment. He had heard similar things from other people, how the political system needed a shakeup. But hearing it from Trump, who had been at the heart of that system, made it hit differently. "So, what are you saying?" Joe asked. "You want to run again?" Trump shook his head. "Not necessarily. I'm thinking bigger. What if we could build something different? A third option, not tied to either side, but offering something new." The idea was bold, almost unbelievable. Joe wasn't sure where the conversation was going, but he was starting to realize this wasn't just a casual chat. It was the beginning of something much bigger. There was a moment of silence as Joe processed what Trump had just said. The idea of a third option, something new outside the usual political system, felt both exciting and unsettling. Joe was used to having deep conversations on his podcast, but this was different. This wasn't just about debating ideas. This was about something that could potentially change the future. Joe leaned forward in his chair, his curiosity piqued. "So, what does this third option look like? I mean, how does it work?" "People have talked about a third party for years, but it never seems to go anywhere." Trump's eyes shifted slightly, and he took a deep breath, like he had been thinking about this for a long time. "It's not about forming another party in the traditional sense. It's about giving people a choice that isn't the same old Republican versus Democrat fight. Both parties have their flaws, but they're both stuck in a loop. People are tired of being forced into one side or the other." Joe nodded. He had heard that frustration from people on all sides of the political spectrum. The idea of a third party that could break that cycle was appealing, but the logistics seemed nearly impossible. "So you're saying this could be something bigger, something that could reach across party lines?" "Exactly," Trump said, his voice steady. "People are tired of the division. They want something that makes sense, something that feels real. We've lost that in politics. We need a platform that can bring people together, not pull them apart. And that's where I think I can make a difference." Joe thought about that for a moment. It wasn't the first time he'd heard someone talk about fixing the political divide, but it felt different coming from Trump. After all, he had been at the center of that divide for so long. Joe knew there had to be more to this conversation. But how do you plan to get people on board? Both sides are so locked in their beliefs. How do you convince them to come together? Trump paused, then smiled. That's the tricky part. It's not just about talking to the people who already agree with you. It's about finding common ground. I've spent years dealing with people who hate my guts. I know how to talk to them, but I also know how to talk to the people who support me. The key is being willing to listen to both sides and not just stick to the talking points. Joe couldn't help but respect that. It wasn't often that a politician or former politician admitted to wanting to listen to people who disagreed with them. Most were too busy trying to win the argument, not actually solve the problems. But Trump's approach seemed different. Maybe it wasn't the same old politics after all. So you're saying you could bring people together who normally wouldn't agree on anything? Joe asked, still processing the boldness of the idea. It's not going to be easy, Trump replied, but nothing worthwhile ever is. The point is people want change. They just don't know how to get it. I think we can show them a way forward. Joe wasn't sure where this conversation would go, but he knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. What Trump was talking about wasn't just another campaign. It was a potential shift in the way politics could be done. The real question was, could it work? And more importantly, would people be ready for it? Joe sat back in his chair, processing Trump's words. Everything the former president had said so far sounded like a big idea, but Joe wasn't ready to just take it all at face value. He had spent years in the public eye, listening to people talk about big ideas, only to watch them fade into nothing. This felt different, sure, but Joe wasn't convinced it could work. You talk about bringing people together, Joe said slowly, his voice calm, but with a hint of challenge. But the problem isn't just the system, right? It's the way people are now. They're divided, and they've been divided for a long time. I mean, look at how polarized everything is. How do you get past that? How do you get people to stop fighting long enough to actually have a conversation? Trump looked at him, unbothered by the question. I get it. I know it's not easy. Trust me, I've spent enough time in the middle of the division. But here's the thing, people are tired. They're tired of the noise. They want something that feels real, not just another person telling them what they want to hear. They want someone who's actually going to get things done, even if it means upsetting the status quo. Joe raised an eyebrow, still skeptical. Yeah, but upsetting the status quo doesn't always get things done. Sometimes it just makes everything worse. We've seen that happen time and time again. Politicians try to break the system, but they end up just feeding into it even more. So what makes you different? Trump leaned forward, his tone firm. Because I've been through it. I've seen how the system works, and I know where it's broken. I know where people feel unheard. I'm not here to play the same game. I'm here to break the cycle. It's not about pretending to be perfect or telling everyone what they want to hear. It's about being honest, even when it's uncomfortable. Joe nodded, intrigued but still cautious. So you're saying that honesty is the key. But don't people just want someone to tell them what to do? They want easy answers. Easy answers don't work, Trump replied, his voice steady. People want the truth, even if it's hard to hear. They want someone who will make decisions based on what's right, not what's popular. I know I'm not everyone's favorite, but people know where I stand. And that's the difference. Joe paused, thinking about that. He had spent enough time interviewing people to know that the truth wasn't always what people wanted to hear. Sometimes the truth was messy and complicated, but it had the power to spark real change. Maybe that's what Trump was getting at. Maybe the time for easy solutions was over. I get what you're saying, Joe said, leaning back. But I still don't know if people are ready for something like this. It's going to take more than just a promise to change things. You're right, Trump agreed. It's going to take action, and that's what we're going to focus on. Not just talk, real change. Joe looked at him, still unsure, but there was something about Trump's determination that made him pause. Maybe, just maybe, this was the kind of conversation the country needed. The conversation seemed to be winding down, but Trump wasn't done yet. He straightened up, looking Joe directly in the eye, his expression turning more serious. It was as if the casual talk was over and now the real purpose of the meeting was about to surface. Joe couldn't help but feel the shift. Something was coming. You know, Joe, Trump said, his tone lower now, there's more to this than just running for office. I'm not sure if I'll run again. Maybe, maybe not. But I've been thinking a lot about something else. Something I think you'd be perfect for. Joe sat up a little straighter, his curiosity piqued. Perfect for? What do you mean? Trump paused, letting the words hang in the air for a moment. I'm talking about a role that's more about influence than power. I've been in the game long enough to know that the right voice can make a bigger impact than any politician. People listen to you, Joe. They trust you. I want to know if you'd be willing to help, off the record, of course. Joe blinked, not quite sure if he heard him correctly. Help? In what way? You've built something amazing with your podcast. You've got the platform, the audience, the trust of millions. And right now, we need someone who can speak the truth, without the filters, without the politics. You're already doing it. But imagine what you could do with the right backing, the right message. Joe wasn't sure what to make of that. He had always stayed out of politics, never getting tied up in the noise of election campaigns or party lines. But this felt different. Trump wasn't asking him to run for office or join a campaign. It sounded like an offer to be a voice, someone who could help shift the conversation, to challenge the system from the outside in a way that Joe had never imagined before. So you're saying you want me to help you change the game? Joe asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though a part of him was still processing what was being offered. Not just help, Trump said. I want you to be part of the change. I've always said the media and the public discourse need more real voices, not the ones who play it safe. You're already out there, challenging the system, speaking to the people who feel unheard. That's the kind of influence we need. I'm not asking you to join a campaign or run for office, but I'd like you to think about how you can help move the conversation forward. If you're willing, I think we can make something powerful happen. Joe felt the weight of the offer settle in. It was an opportunity he had never considered before. He had always kept his distance from politics, but this wasn't politics as usual. This was a chance to have an impact, an influence that went beyond just talking about issues, but actually shaping the conversation. I've never thought about it like that, Joe said slowly, feeling the gravity of the moment. I've always believed in speaking my mind, but this feels different. It is, Trump replied, because this is about more than just words. It's about action, about making people see that change is possible, and you're the kind of person who can make that happen. Joe sat back, letting the silence hang in the air. He wasn't sure where this would lead, but one thing was certain, this conversation was far from over. Joe sat quietly for a moment, his mind racing with the weight of Trump's offer. He wasn't sure what to make of it. It was big, bigger than anything he had ever thought about before. He'd always focused on having open, honest conversations, speaking his truth without trying to please anyone. But this was different. This was a call to action, a chance to help shape a new direction in the country, but it came with its own set of questions. He shifted in his seat, his gaze drifting around the room. It all felt surreal. The large windows let in soft afternoon light, casting shadows that seemed to make the room feel even more serious. His thoughts were swirling as he tried to process everything that had been said. I get that this is a huge offer, Joe finally spoke, his voice steady, but with an underlying uncertainty. But I don't know, man. I've always stayed out of politics for a reason. It's messy, it's divisive, and if I'm being honest, I don't want to get caught up in that. Trump nodded, as if he had expected this response. I get it, he said, leaning back in his chair. That's exactly why I came to you, because I know you're not in it for the usual reasons. You're not looking for a political career. You've built something that people trust, something real. And that's why I think you can make a difference. Joe's mind continued to turn over the possibilities. He had always been a fan of change, genuine change, but politics was full of promises that never quite materialized. Could he really make a difference in a world so entrenched in division? Could he use his platform for something more than just entertainment? But how do I know this isn't just another political game? Joe asked. It feels like no matter what happens, the system is always going to win. It always ends up the same. People get excited for a little while, but then they get tired and nothing really changes. I know the system, Trump replied, is tone more serious now. And I've seen how it traps people, but I also know how to break through that. I'm not asking you to change everything overnight, but if you believe in what I'm saying, if you believe people need something different, maybe you could help them see that change is possible. Joe sat back, trying to understand the depth of what Trump was asking of him. It wasn't just a simple offer. It was a chance to be part of something bigger, but it also came with risks. Being involved in any sort of movement meant attracting attention, both good and bad. It meant stepping into the spotlight in a way he hadn't before. And while he had always been in the public eye, this felt different. I don't know, Joe said after a long pause. I'm not sure I'm ready to take that step. It's a big decision. I understand, Trump said quietly. Take your time, but don't wait too long. Sometimes the best opportunities come when you least expect them. Joe looked at him, feeling the weight of those words. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing. Whatever decision he made, it would change things forever. And that, more than anything, made him pause. The room was quiet, and for a long moment, neither Joe nor Trump spoke. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but one filled with weight. Joe's mind was racing, each thought colliding with the next. Everything he had built with his podcast, his reputation for questioning the system, his desire to stay true to himself, it all felt like it was coming to a crossroads. The offer Trump made was tempting, but also full of uncertainty. Joe knew it could change everything. He glanced over at Trump, who seemed calm, collected, like he was used to people hesitating. But Joe couldn't ignore the reality of what was at stake. This wasn't just about having a conversation or sparking a new debate. This was about possibly becoming a part of a movement, a change that could shift the way people saw politics, media, and even truth itself. I've always said I don't want to get into politics, Joe finally spoke, breaking the silence. His voice was quieter now, thoughtful. I like where I am, just having these conversations, getting people to think. I don't want to be a part of the system that's broken. Trump nodded slowly, understanding. I get that. And honestly, I'm not asking you to dive into politics. I'm asking you to do what you've always done. Speak your truth, challenge the norms, but with a bigger platform. Sometimes it's about being part of the change, not just talking about it. Joe's eyes shifted to the window where the sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the city. The quietness of the moment seemed to stretch on, and for the first time in a while, Joe felt the weight of the decision ahead of him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the people who listened to him, the ones who trusted his voice to speak honestly. Could he really walk away from the opportunity to change things, or would he just become another voice complaining about the system? So you want me to take a step into something bigger than just my show? Joe asked, his voice now carrying a bit of the uncertainty he felt. Something that could either work or completely blow up in my face. Exactly, Trump replied. But you've already been through the fire. People trust you because you're not afraid to speak out. That's what we need more of. People who are willing to challenge the system, even if it's uncomfortable. You don't have to make a decision today, but think about it. Joe looked down at his hands for a moment, then looked back at Trump. It wasn't an easy choice. He had always valued his independence, the freedom to speak without being tied down. Yet there was a part of him that couldn't deny the opportunity to be part of something bigger. To truly challenge the system, not just on his own terms, but with a team that was ready to shake things up. I'll think about it, Joe said finally, feeling the weight of his words. This is a big decision, one that I can't take lightly. Take your time, Trump said, a hint of approval in his voice. But remember, sometimes the best opportunities come when you least expect them. As Joe stood up to leave, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. He wasn't sure what he would decide, but he knew that whatever choice he made, it would lead to something bigger than just a conversation. It was a choice about his future, about his voice, and about the kind of impact he wanted to have on the world. And that was something worth thinking over.